Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel. A very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us on this YouTube live stream. We've got a very interesting theme for our masterclass on moonlighting, an idea whose time has come. Has it indeed? That's the question that we're going to kind of debate, and we've got a terrific panel, and I'll come and introduce them very quickly so that you get to know them, and then I'll set context for this evening's session, and I also have some housekeeping rules. So I'll go to you, Satish, first. A very warm welcome. You're, of course, you're a name that needs no introduction. You've done so many different things, including being head of HR for the entire Tata Group and independent director more recently at NPCI. And Satish joins us from Pune. Welcome, Satish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hari. Hari, again, is a familiar name for all of us in the Founding Fuel community and in industry as well. Hari is, of course, on a very interesting entrepreneurial journey right now, after having stepped down as CHRO at Big Basket. We'll hear more about what he's currently doing as soon as we get started. But welcome, Hari.
Hi, thanks, Arji.
Hari is joining us from Bangalore. So we've truly got a fairly diverse panel, and I'll come to you, Surabhi. Welcome to this session, Surabhi. Surabhi essentially is kind of building Vihat, as she calls it, which is an online agri-marketplace. So you're using technology to reshape one of the most traditional industries, which is fascinating. And we'll hear from her about what her journey is and how she's looking at this whole theme around moonlighting. And finally, our very own Kavi Arasu, who's our Director, Learning and Change at Founding Fuel and done some amazing stuff in his career. Spent about, 10 years or 9 years with Asian Paints, Kavi, handling a whole bunch of portfolios. He's a leadership coach, he's a consultant, works at the intersection of technology and the work and future of work, and a whole host of things. So welcome, Kavi.
Thank you.
Mute, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. And Kavi is joining us from Bombay. So Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, and Pune. Wonderful. I'm based in Bombay, I have to tell you. So I'll dive in. Before I do, just a couple of housekeeping rules for the audience today. We'd like to really keep this interactive, because the whole idea is that I'm sure you have many ideas, questions evolving in your minds as well as audiences, as you kind of, so we'd like you to be active participants in this conversation. So instead of, waiting till the very end to take questions, we will try and kind of pepper this conversation with some audience questions as well, because I think that'll keep it interesting for all of you who are joining on that live stream. My colleague and co-founder, Charles Assisi, is actually anchoring that chat on YouTube, and he will engage with the participants, respond to their comments, questions. He will also curate a few questions and share it with me, which I will then pose to the panel as well. So that's very simply what we're looking to do. Why are we doing this conversation? Very quickly, on August 3rd or 4th or wherever, whenever Swiggy announced its what they called industry first moonlighting policy, we were very excited, because as a platform, Founding Fuel has always been very excited about driving new thinking, new ideas. We want to push the boundaries of what is possible, right? And I think this comes at a very interesting juncture, because I think we're coming out of COVID, 2 years have gone by, and it's kind of upended a lot of things that we held dear for a very long time, especially about work, about employment, about moonlighting as well. So that's something that we will try and kind of unpack through a very reflective conversation. I was just sharing with the panelists that this is not a television style debate. We're keen to hear and learn from each other and build something which is valuable. There are 3 things that we're kind of going to do. First, we will listen to each of the panelists, and they will share what they're seeing. And and the lens through which they're seeing it, because each of them bring different perspectives, and it'll be useful for you to understand the context, because there's enormous variety in this room already, and as participants you will bring your perspectives as well to this. So I think we're looking at a very rich conversation. So what are they seeing that's different? Why are we kind of debating this whole controversy around moonlighting? Because we are, unfortunately, the comment that you all heard that Rishad Premji made recently, the executive chairman of Wipro, where he called it plain cheating, has kind of stoked a pretty healthy debate. And it's not a bad thing per se to stoke that debate, because I think it's gotten people to come to the party and talk about this, because more we talk, more we understand each other and where we're going. So I think it's a good thing actually to stoke debate, and it's absolutely fine if someone has a different opinion. The second part is really to understand the underpinning of this change. What's really lies behind some of these conversations that we're seeing on social media, across media as well. We'll try and kind of listen again to the panelists. And the third final thing is we'd like you to leave with very clear takeaways and insights and practices, new mindsets and new approaches. That's important, because if it's just an intellectual conversation without any takeaways, that's not going to be terribly useful for all of you who are leaders in your own businesses. And we've got a very varied set of participants joining from different industries, right? So that is very useful in itself, right? So keep the chat going. Charles is very much there. He will, in some ways, respond and challenge you as well. He can be quite an interesting guy to, as you'll realize, as this conversation rolls on. So as we talk through some of the issues, try and kind of put down what your thoughts are as audiences and what are the questions on your mind. So that's in a nutshell. So that's what it is. So we'll dive straight in, and I thought I'd come to you, Hari, first, right? How are you kind of looking at this issue, and through what prism? Just give us a quick sense.
So I think at a very high level, IG, I think we need to revisit the very idea of moonlighting. I think the idea of moonlighting comes from an era where an employer bought a certain number of hours from their employees, and that could be 8 hours a day, it could be any number of hours, 45 hours a week. And during that time, an employee wasn't expected to do anything else for anyone. So I think the problem was that some employees used the time that they were paid for by their employer to do other things. And these could be paid or unpaid engagements. So I think that was a fair expectation in those days when this was the paradigm. But I think over the decades, what has happened is that more and more workers have got classified as knowledge workers. And companies began to think, we're not buying a specific number of hours. They are available to us on an unlimited basis. We can reach out to them any time of the day or the night or weekends. They're expected to work from home. So I think, expectations from employees on the part of employers kept increasing over the decades. And therefore, I think the earlier paradigm of, not being completely and wholly available to a particular employer is no longer relevant. So I think it's very important to define the idea of moonlighting in this context. So I think that's the core of the issue, which is employer expectations of employees have changed dramatically. They've been classified as knowledge workers. They are not there, to give a fixed number of hours. They are available on an unlimited basis. And yet the idea that they cannot do anything else in their spare time is a very, very unfair expectation. So I think it has kicked off this entire idea of moonlighting, and I think that's the root.
But just for the benefit of our audience, just give us a quick sense of where you are, because you're, I know, transitioning from a corporate career to an entrepreneurial venture, which of great significance to this discussion. And so do you want to kind of just share in a few 30 seconds what prism through which you're looking at this conversation? Because
I think I have always looked at issues, through my own prism, irrespective of who I've worked for or what I have been doing. So I've always spoken my mind in terms of what I always thought was right and fair. So I think my transition from startup turned unicorn like a big basket to my own entrepreneurial journey will really have nothing to do with my views. Even when I was at Big Basket, I always spoke up, about things that we did right, things that we did wrong, or the Tata Group, for instance, the entire approach and the new app, whether it was effective, not effective, super app. So I've spoken my mind irrespective of my affiliations.
No, that's good. But I said I meant that you have now your leg in both worlds, so you're privy to conversations from both sides. I'll come to you, Surabhi. You just want to kind of quickly set context for the audience in terms of what you do and how this conversation kind of resonates with you in what way and in what way.
Sure, Indrajit. So for me, I see this moonlighting. This is not the new concept. Maybe for India, definitely is a new word. And we all are talking about moonlighting since Swiggy has announced that. And now it's become a talk of a town. But if I see the Western world, moonlighting is always there. So people are doing part-time jobs to keep up their passion and love, and doing obviously definitely somewhere to have their financial support as well. But in India, definitely we have such contracts with the employer where we are not supposed to do something different. I understand that we are not supposed to share the secrets of trade, but yeah, definitely people should be allowed to follow their own passion and do whatever they want, because the way Hari has explained that we have certain hours. Initially, we used to have a certain hours, okay, that you have to dedicate. But now I think things have changed. We are not working 9 to 5. I think we are working 24/7. In terms of my experience, in last 2 years or 2.5 years working with Dehat, we have grown exponentially in terms of 10x, in terms of number, people count, and business as well. And everything was happening when we were working from home. So somewhere trust is there that, yeah, people are working. You don't have to watch people that what they are doing. It's more of you are trusting people and people are delivering their task. So moonlighting, I see that employers should be open that if someone wants to follow their passion, yeah, what's wrong in that? Definitely, we as an individual or as a professional, we understand that we are not supposed to share that trade of secrets, but definitely.
Sure. So you use two words which are significant. One is, I heard the word passion projects, and I also heard about trust, right?
Yeah.
And you did that amazing scale up in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. I'll come to you, Kavi. You've been kind of tuning into a lot of voices, very interesting ones. Would you want to unpack that for us in terms of what you're hearing?
Yes, Saji, thank you. I've been fortunate enough to work with some students, teach in a business school, a moonlight, so to speak, there. So, I teach in a business school, so I hear young voices. I work in the corporate sector with corporate leaders, so I hear different sets of voices. And it's interesting to see the distinct in the voices and to see how both sides see there is no chance of any argument here because it's a settled issue for both sides. So there is one generation which says that what are we even talking about? We're here and this is our life and we'll get to do a few things. And there's the other generation which talks about the same thing very differently. At the same time, both generations and all of us have gone through a uniform experience of the pandemic, which is accentuated that life is possible, work is possible remote. That's one. The second and most important thing, central to this, in my opinion, are a few elements. I'll just quote two and I'll pause there for now. At one point in time, employment and the employer set the identity for people. Now that shifted, and it's not an employer, but a portfolio of skills that's become more important. Now suddenly, I'm not identifying myself with an employer as much as I want a portfolio of skills that I can market myself. That's one. And the second one that's even more important is availability and access to this kind of work opportunities is increased exponentially. I didn't realize and I didn't know that there are consultants specifically in the space of moonlighting. They hire people who will only moonlight. So there are, this is in addition to all the other spaces available to find people who want to moonlight. So the opportunities have increased, and my own perception of what it takes to, what is my identity and how I'd want to build my career with a portfolio of skills and not an association with one person has shifted. These two, I think, have really, and coupled with the pandemic and the collective experience of I want to experience things right now, has really shifted the game. And there are a bunch of other things from the other side, which I'll come to later. But I think these are very important shifts at a broader societal level as well, for us to examine this as a social phenomena and not necessarily limited to what's happening in the corporate sector.
Terrific. Important societal shifts, particularly. And you talked about that whole transition from drawing your identity from the employer, as opposed to kind of building your own portfolio of skills, and that's what you get known for. Brilliant. And the opportunity is multiplying. I'll come to you, Satish. You've been listening to the three voices on our
with
panel.
deep interest.
Yes, deep interest. Tell us how you're kind of viewing this, and what are the stimuli that kind of you're tuning into.
So I'm going to seek your indulgence and the audience's indulgence to step back a bit. And this is not misaligned with what I've heard from the three of you, but in a way, it provides the backdrop to the drama in the front of the stage. And very quickly getting into that, there are two threads that I see. And again, I see this from a point of view of someone who has a finger or a toe in many of the sectors and spaces that I've been involved in. And, so whether it's Kavi's moonlighting in campuses, or whether it's, Hari's bouncing between large, heavy, large institutions, organizations like Big Basket, or the kind of organizations he's worked in, and bouncing into one table and four chairs and, let's get started on this business and make it big. Or what Surabhi is doing in terms of difficult to connect, but apparently revolutionary connections in technology and karma bhumis to create amazing ventures. A bit of all this, plus a bit of stepping back. And to me, two parts that come to my mind quickly. One is that there have been certain trends that we've observed over time prior to COVID. And I'm taking COVID as a kind of inflection point for all of us, I hope justifiably. These were weak signals, or these were emerging trends. If you go back in our own recall to that point of time when the first lockdown hit us, flexibility was beginning to become an important subject of discussion with both lawmakers of all people, policy makers, policy advocates, companies, and individuals. But it was like a mild veena in the background. The dramatic sitar or the drum beats really started post that period, and equivalent of the veena of individual need for flexibility and the rights of individuals not covered under the organized sector industrial laws beginning to become a concern, especially since a lot of industry had begun to quietly acknowledge 30 to 70% of their brick and mortar workforce were in the contract or not the organized labor that we are used to being governed by labor laws. The other part of it was this whole phenomena of ease of doing business preceded COVID in its murmurations. So just hinting at that. And in a way, one wasn't surprised when I heard this from somebody that, what's the big deal about COVID? We were already beginning to start doing some of these things. So, it's more of the same. Now, that's a very interesting voice that I've heard very recently. You take the tape and play it forward into the COVID era. So what's really different? And I think 3 or 4 things are stunningly different from the voices I've heard. Restaurant worker, not covered under organized labor. And when I have spoken to people like him and him particularly, his first response to me in the post-lockdown of the first round was, sir, some job is better than no job, no? So this whole notion of fairness, equity, was a bitter pill swallowed by compulsion, is my take on that. That's a phenomena we are still dealing with. The US is dealing with that in terms of in-work poverty, as they very grandiosely describe it. Ours is a very real phenomena which reflects that. Second point that I want to make over there, the precariousness of a very large number of people employed or were employed in the unorganized and even in the organized sector has heightened and made them even more vulnerable. And another fascinating voice that I've heard recently when talking to somebody, one of our security guards, saying, have you heard about Shram card? There is this, and by the way, I'd like to invite the audience, if any of them knows a bit more than a bit on the Shram card, please do, send Charles the input, because I'm struggling to figure out where is this gone. And the point that he made was very, very simply, sir, आज तो हमको टाइम ही नहीं मिलता है दूसरा नौकरी करने का. So I said, पहले करते थे क्या? हाँ सर, सुबह का शिफ्ट यहाँ पे करते थे, रात का शिफ्ट दूसरी जगह में करते थे. That moonlighting actually was an accepted practice by contractors to exploit the time. Hari spoke about the notion of employment is about 8 hours I give you as an exchange for the compact of employment. That's been backwards and forwards over the last 50 decades. And I exaggerate to say that. But I do think that the notion of whole-time employment actually meant implicitly or explicitly, more explicitly, 24 hours, I own this asset. The assumption that's changed today is one of the few. People want access to capability. They are not necessarily concerned about ownership of the asset. And therefore, those are the kind of voices that we are hearing. And it frankly doesn't matter to me whether it's right or wrong. What does matter to me is these are the voices of the people whom we call stakeholders, whether it's a policymaker, whether it's a company chasing profits,
Sure.
Or it is an individual worker affected by all this.
Sure. That's, I think you've kind of alerted us to one side of this equation we sometimes forget, and that in some ways constitutes 90% of the workforce, unorganized labor, right? It's a very fundamental point that you make, and you talked about vulnerability of that segment. It's enormous. COVID showed us. I'll come to, I wanted to shift the conversation to knowledge workers, Hari, you spoke about, right? And I think Satish is kind of trying to provoke us to think about ownership versus access, and that, but for some reason, the big, large IT firms are resisting it. What's going on? I know you've been studying that phenomena very closely. Just give us some sense. what's at play? You're on mute, I think. Yeah.
So I think, IG, in the background, what has been happening is that one more trend has been taking shape, and that's a precursor to moonlighting. And that trend is gig work. So gig work has been pretty common in the blue collar category. So I think what the pandemic did to the white collar work, what the tech platforms, did to the blue collar work, which has enabled, gig work to really happen. So when white collar workers were, confined to the boundaries of their home and were forced to work from home, I think that's when they really, thought about, can I do something on the side? Can I, achieve some kind of fulfillment that I never could get when there was work from office? Because, doing side gigs from the, office workspace is not very easy. So I think this provided them that opportunity. You had several platforms that enabled gig work come up at a rapid pace. It was very easy to discover cross-border, opportunities on the internet. Payments became very easy. You had payment gateways and, global escrow accounts that enable payments also to happen pretty seamlessly. So I think, the white collar workers began to taste something which they've never tasted so long, which is that they have a bunch of skills. I think Kavi beautifully put it, which is they began to value a portfolio of skills rather than feeling affiliation for a particular employer. And that was, I think, once you taste blood, it's very difficult, not to go after it again and again. So I think what has happened is that several of these IT services companies have not been able to get this paradigm for several reasons. And I think they have been operating on, things which I would say are gray in terms of when it comes to fairness, in terms of dealing with employees. I'll just give you so many examples. Many of the employment contracts have become very, very asymmetric, one-sided in terms of liabilities, in terms of everything else as well. So, for example, all these IT services companies enter into contracts with their clients where a clause is about, price escalation, which is connected to labor wage inflation. But wage inflation doesn't happen the way we all know it, because these companies have been able to, keep the entry level salaries on campuses almost constant. And that's their entire business model, which is keep the pyramids very bottom heavy, keep the bottom of the pyramid costs, fixed, which is that you go to campuses which are more and more obscure year after year and keep the salaries fixed. So I think, labor escalation hasn't happened. The wage inflation hasn't really happened. And these companies have been benefiting from price escalation clauses. And the true beneficiaries have not been any recipients of these. And there's several other unfair clauses, And I think the very, act of denying the freedom to association, forming associations, and not just the services companies, many of these e-commerce companies also openly, are denying employees, blue collar as well as white collar, the right to form associations, as a result of which several of these liability clauses are unfair. For example, the poor blue collar worker who's delivering some stuff to clients in an e-commerce company, misplaces an item, or the company misplaces an item, and this guy is forced to pick up the cost for it. Deductions are made, in a unilateral manner from this person's and monthly wages, and there's no recourse. This person can't even go anywhere and seek, a redressal. There are no grievance handling mechanisms in many of these organizations. And the worst thing is that, managements don't even take a stand. There is no policy around how to deal with something like this. So the frontline supervisory staff pretty much take their own calls unilaterally, and management pretty much turn a blind eye always. So I think a lot of unfairness has crept into these practices. For example, there was a a rule which says, you can't perform any other work other than company work on company premises. That's so outdated, because employees perform company work on their premises, which is their homes. So how can companies not allow, employees to do some of their work, from their premises? Because work is no longer 9 to 5, which is, it doesn't get bunched up back to back. Sometimes you have to do work at, at night when you get back home, sometimes on weekends. So when work itself has become flexible, how employees use their time, I think should be, there should be some degree of fairness. So I think over the years, these companies have applied the Taylorian methods of, achieving efficiencies far better than Taylor even anticipated. And they have looked at pyramids, they've looked at utilization rates, cut costs, cut corners. And the entire business model is based on keeping, an unfair wage at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think, that's how these companies are looking at it. I can get your time in an unlimited manner, but I won't let you do, what you want in your free time. And I'm not, people say now, have begun to say, what, as long as it's transparent, it's okay. I don't think there's a need for employees to even disclose what they're doing unless you are accepting a gift of, a disproportionate value from a vendor, or you're working for a direct competitor. There's no need to disclose what you do in your free time. That's a violation of privacy. So it's not even important for, employees to disclose exactly what they do. So I think, whenever a big trend is taking shape, two groups begin to form. Those that quickly realize that, there is a mega trend, I better ride on that and make the best of it. And there are those who keep on resisting it till it becomes inevitable and they are forced to reluctantly embrace the trend. So I see some of this happening in the IT services companies, which are reluctant to embrace this. But the good thing is that there are some voices who are speaking out, and some of these voices are from the services industries, IT services. I'm very, very delighted to see, some of these voices, and it's very good to see, the industry breaking up into two separate camps. And I have no doubt as to what would prevail eventually.
No, that's exactly the point, that it's at least fostering some debate and a different point of view. And it's absolutely fine if there are different points of view. That I kind of, before I come to Surabhi and Kavi, there are a couple of questions that have come in, and I just wanted to kind of touch upon a few at this stage, and I will pick up some more. I think Vijay Rao, I think one of our subscribers from Pune, he's asking, is moonlighting a symptom or a possible solution? And should we not understand and define what the problem really is? Kavi, do you want to go, or you're not?
Yeah, I think I would think it's important for us to step back a little. And Hari spoke very evocatively about how employment contracts are unfair and one-sided. And I would just talk a little bit about what does the job really mean, and just building on what Hari was saying so far. And I would think a job has three components. One, there is a legal contract. That's unfair, sure. The second, there is a task contract that I'm supposed to be doing X, Y, Z, and that is going to fulfill deliver a certain set of value to the organization. And third, there is a psychological contract that I belong here to this place, and I have a sense of identity with that place. I have a sense of belonging with that place. Now, over a period of time, what's happened perhaps is the contracts have become one-sided, but more importantly, the relationships in corporate setups have all become transactional. So I have a contract which is one side, which is legal, and I have very limited relationships with people within the system. That's number two. And there's one more thing which also is important for us to understand, and that is my job challenging enough in my corporate or in my regular space? Moonlighting is often mistaken, in my opinion, is often mistaken that it is undertaken only for financial considerations. I would beg to differ. Is the job challenging enough? Is a very important question to ask. Number two, are there good, strong relationships within the setup? Is another important question to ask. Do I belong to this place? And if those are missing as well, it is a symptom. When moonlighting happens that way, it is a symptom that there possibly are levers that we are possibly missing a beat somewhere. That's one. And therefore, in this current scheme of things where we are right now, moonlighting can offer solutions to a wide array of possibilities that are there. It is a great solution for how employees and how employment, how progressive you're seen as, what kind of talent pools you have access to, all of that is possible. But I would more importantly try and see, what is it a symptom of? in an organizational setup, and therefore what can we do? And I'm sure we'll come to that a little while later, but these are important elements as well to think of as to what kind of relationship exists, what kind of conversations happen on the job, and more importantly, what kind of challenge is presented to employees as well. It's not just a financial decision for employees. And there was one interesting story which went that one person could do 7 jobs, and it was found out only because he had 7 the provident fund credits and all of that, and that's how he got quote unquote caught. I was perplexed. If he could do 7 jobs
Correct.
and get away with it, what does that even imply to those 6 jobs? And that's the question that we should really think of. IG, you're on. Yeah.
My apologies. So Ravi, do you want to kind of add anything to what Kavi was saying?
No, definitely, Indrajit. In fact, Kavi, he has mentioned about 3 things: legal, task, and psychological. I think it's very, very important to understand, because especially these days, all the Gen Z, which we call all the tech guys or Gen Z, these guys are, if they are not feeling connected with the organization, or if the challenges are not there, I think it's definitely a problem for them. Those were the days when people have joined the company and they will spend another 10 or 15 years comfortably in their comfort zone. But now things have changed a lot. Every 6 months, these new generation, they will come up with new ideas. And if the challenges are not there, they're not enjoying their job. So very often they ask, if you hire a management trainee these days, after 6 months, what next? But I remember when I was a management trainee for 1 year, I was doing the same job. I have not even asked my manager that what next, because, okay, things will change gradually. But now these days, okay, that patience obviously goes down, is definitely going down. But that task has to be very, very challenging. And that psychological connect, because I belong to this place, it's very important. So definitely it's not only about financial thing. It's one of the component, but it's more of following your passion, feeling inclusive and belonging to that place. That is more important.
Many years ago, I remember the great Professor Shumantro Ghoshal, his book on the individualized cooperation talked about the whole changing the smell of the place, right? I thought it was such a beautiful way of describing when you walk into a place, whether you feel included, or whether it's an inclusive setup, and how you design work. And we've kind of reduced everything to an assembly line and made it everything transactional. So it's not surprising that people are yearning to do something that they're really passionate about. I just kind of, if it's okay, pick up another question, which is aligned to some extent with what we're discussing from my former colleague Anmol Srivastava. He's saying that, and he's a Gen Y, or I think he is. He'll kill me if I get that wrong. But he's saying that, look, moonlighting, what does it do to our notions of rest and rejuvenation, right? Like in many cases, when people are pursuing hobbies, it may be great, but if you're pursuing other jobs, simply because your base pay isn't good, it can be bad too, right? Is there the need for us to think about this in ways? And if so, then how should we look at this? And COVID certainly, I think, brought that to bear as well. I mean, the level of fatigue and burnout and all of that just simply went out of the window. So wants to take Satish? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Anmol. That was really a brilliant question. And it takes me back to many things we've been saying. I think, and this is a perspective I think has relevance in this conversation. From a large organization or the large corporate sector, the brick and mortar, the established IT companies, which we can with great relish tear to bits and stamp on the ground and do a little voodoo dance around their dead remains, and very enjoyably so perhaps. But I think it's important to understand what is it that is besotting that thinking with paradigms that are so obviously irrelevant to a lot of other people. And I think it's not about who's right and who's wrong, but it's more about they are also stakeholders in managing a transition that we seek to make, whether it is for Surabhi's passionate pursuit of projects that you do because they rejuvenate you and are recharging of your batteries, or as Hari says, this is not about money alone. This is about me monetizing my time and capabilities fairly and with all my rights respected. And why should a corporate scream, this is simply cheating, when I try to do that? And I think that the reason why people are struggling with this is something which bears examination. To me, one is the paradigm of employment as we have grown to understand it. All of us, I mean, I think Hari, you, Kavi, IG, I'm not so sure about the Gen Z and Gen Z minus kind of people that some of our people on the panel represent. But all of us have worked for large organizations in which we have had this notion of a legal contract, and hopefully a well-intentioned legal contract, an intent to ensure rest and rejuvenation, an intent to play parent, perhaps overly so, that you will take the kind of rest and I will provide for it. And in my blurred vision of the past, perhaps the organizations that we worked for said, we will give you leave travel, and that's the father's way of making sure that you take some rest and leave. We'll give you leave. We'll build holiday homes. We will make sure that you take your leave, and we will treat you like a human being in our own whatever way. So one, the way to hell is often paved with good intentions. The second is that if that paradigm comes through into today's age and sees moonlighting as breaking the compact that they were groomed in and have internalized over the decades, what's the way forward? If monetization of my spare time is legally obstructed by my not being able to claim multiple benefits, but it is a matter of making more money either in overseas payments or cross-geography payments or local multiple timeshare, it's like another part of the Mahindra business could well say, listen, I own this resort. I rent out slots in this to use and enjoy for people as a timeshare resort. Nobody else owns it. Can we not apply that to work and a work compact?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, let's bring a bit of multi-sided conversation here.
Yeah. In fact, sorry, Hari, you want to?
Max 1 minute. I wanted to add to this, which is, I think, the question in terms of burnout and the fact that doing multiple gigs, will it result in burnouts? My view on this is that I'll go with what Kavi really said, which is that most of the people who are doing these side gigs are doing them for passion and fulfillment. And I think, by the way, as a byproduct, they also end up making some money. And I think when you do something that you love to do, the question of burnout doesn't really happen. I think when you're forced to do something that you don't like day after day after day, that's when burnout happens. When you're doing what you enjoy, you actually get rejuvenated. And I don't want anyone to take this to an extreme, saying that if you do 24 hours what you love to do, you still won't burn out. But largely, I think, if you're doing things that you enjoy.
So here's a rapid fire interject for you. What explains the large number of reported burnouts and the large clamor of all of this is for passion, none of it is for money? These are two polarities. And where is the real balance? Because where is moonlighting happening as you and I understand it in our limited conversations? My conversations are very limited. My conversations with IT professionals are that moonlighting is prevalent very much so at the bottom of the pyramid, as you described it, which is not at the minimum wage level. It is significantly above that, right? So it is about a more competitive earning as well. And it is also happening at the very high end, but in very few cases, because of multiple corporate reasons. But it does happen there. At
So
the
my-
level of a senior systems architect, or at the level of a real deep tech player with a lot of wisdom and experience. But then the competitive challenge becomes unmanageable. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to break this up into two separate parts. One is burnout happening because of excessive work versus people moonlighting. My own sense is that those who are moonlighting are probably doing far more of work that they like. And my sense is that burnout is not a real problem there. I think my sense is that the burnout is a problem. I'll just finish. My sense is that burnout is really a problem for employees who are working within an organization and doing work day after day, stretched for weeks on end, working on weekends and weekdays, doing things that they don't really love to do. I think burnout is a real problem there, not with the moonlighting folks who are enjoying a lot of the stuff that they're doing.
I totally agree with you, and which is why I thought it was a distraction. You brought in burnout into moonlighting. It hadn't even occurred to me.
I think Anmol was asking this question, but that will it lead to burnout?
Yeah, so I am completely with you in terms of saying more burnout is happening because people are burning the midnight oil in the organizations that they are working.
Yes, correct. That's my view.
I have another interesting question that Ajay Kelkar asked. I think he's joined us from either Goa or Bombay. He shuttles between two of those places. And he says a lot of new ventures have been set up by entrepreneurs while they've continued their day jobs. Right? Now, isn't it possible for companies to see this as a innovation driver and almost a new venture tool? I thought it was a very interesting way to think about it. But anyone wants to take a stab at it? Kavi, Surabhi?
Kavi, you please take it.
I think there are so many examples of this. If you look at organizations like Flipkart and Taxi for Sure, they have engendered so many entrepreneurs, people who, were actually figuring out the next big thing, even when they were working for these companies like Flipkart and, Taxi for Sure, and came up with some brilliant ideas. So I think these companies, what they did was they encouraged their employees, to have fun, and go out and build their own things. They didn't see that as a conflict at all. And I think, even if you look at a company like PayPal, all the best companies in the world, so many great companies have been spawned from the PayPal mafia, people who actually were moonlighting in PayPal while they were building out their next big things. So I think if you see it positively, then you will.
But it takes a heck of a lot to be able to think in that sort of way. I'm not sure where, are we there? I don't know. I'd love to hear more views, but Surabhi, are you likely to create a mafia inside the heart?
No, but definitely these days, that I'm not saying that people are creating their own business, but these days people are really passionate, okay, and they really wanted to do something extra, and wherever they have that passion, because I have seen within, not exactly here, but my ex-colleagues and all.
You can tell us, there's no issue.
So my ex-colleagues and in fact in organization also, I have seen that people are very passionate about their normal job which they are performing, but side by side they're creating something else also. And one fine day we get to know, okay, now I'm starting my own and I'm leaving. So which is a very good thing. Wow. So because it's all about passion. It's not only about money. Like I said before, money definitely is one of the component, but it's more of a passion. Okay, I wanted to create something for my own thing because, So, people are.
So, Kavi, I wanted to come to you just to kind of build on the point that Hari and Surabhi also made. There's a lovely question here from Stephen Punen. I hope I got your name right. You first need to personally decide, he says, what excites you and what you can do towards that goal, right? but can you slice your excitement and say that these are my time zones when I'm in my zone? Is that possible? Because I was talking about the individualized cooperation. Maybe times come for, I don't know what to describe it, but do you want to kind of take a stab at that?
Yes, sure. Excitement, is it seen as an input or as an outcome? If you look at excitement as it's an input that I need to be excited to be able to pursue something, then perhaps that question is, when am I excited enough to do X, or when can I and how can I compartmentalize a few things? But if you look at excitement as an outcome, as when I do this, I get excited, and then you start looking at what do I do which gives me the excitement. And then you can see how much time you have and how you play with. I myself have gone through that space while I was in the corporate world and then moved out. I've gone through that space myself, alluding to the earlier conversation that was just on. It's important for us to remember that there is one space of passion, and there is this lack of definitiveness about what definitely will excite me. And that's where a portfolio of experiences count, a portfolio of skills count. And then you do a little bit of experiments, a bunch of experiments, and see where you settle in.
Beautiful.
And this one last point I want to make here, which is there is a certain tendency of boundarylessness, which is now seeping into society. And you can read up research. Research is on, by the way, on all these topics from 94 onwards. A lot of research. In 2005, there was great research published on boundarylessness, which is creeping in. And you can't now, therefore, say this is the boundary. When there is a quotient for boundarylessness as well, for people who have higher boundarylessness quotients in them, they will tend to pursue a bunch of different things. And those things need not be just restricted to what we affix a label called moonlighting. I'll give you one example. Many of us would be more familiar with this. There is one particular person who's in my apartment complex who is part of the Resident Welfare Association.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that moonlighting? He spends a lot of time in it.
Yeah.
What does he do there? I mean, I ask him, why do you do this? He says, I get a lot of energy from doing this. I get to meet a lot of people. I get to talk about a lot of things that are important. Now, what is that? Is that moonlighting? Is it not moonlighting? How do you define that? Now, therefore, this affixing of labels, this is called moonlighting, and therefore you shouldn't do this, doesn't sit well with me. That's one. Two, coming back to the question, figure out what's at least my opinion, my experience, figure out what excites you. Do a bunch of experiments, and please don't, I would tell myself, do not look for excitement at the start line, but seek out if you're still excited when you finish that project. And that is a way of saying, where do I go back and start again?
Satish, I'll just come to you. There's a very interesting allied question, and then both Kavi and you can take a stab at it, because Bimal Rath, I think many of us know him. He said that there are kind of linked issues of trust and transparency. And how do you as an individual, kind of create or advertise or promote yourself as your skills portfolio, really? And basically tell the world that, look, you're open to multiple engagements. I thought very interesting one to think about. I don't know if the question is clear. If it's not, then Satish, do you want to take a stab, and then we can go to...
Yeah, I will try and take a stab at that, but I do want to set one build on what Kavi said. This notion of passion and boundarylessness, I think, is one of the pre-COVID factors that has been an emergent theme for quite some time. And organizations have responded in an older fashioned way by saying, Kavi, why don't you take a sabbatical? Kavi, why don't you go and do this? And we've all been part of that. For example, is independent boards for an employed person moonlighting? Is being on the board of an educational institution of repute moonlighting? Is going and taking classes at a place like Tuldapur on a relatively obscure course in a bachelor's degree in social work for villagers of the surrounding area, moonlighting. So there are dimensions to it which link to the question that Vimal has also asked. I think passion is a key ingredient of how people flesh out the multiple zones of their life. It's also an important dimension that I see today, which people are recognizing I have a choice. The flip side of the learning I've observed from COVID is where people have said, I'm alone. I have to deal with this on my own largely. I can't look at employer or government or somebody else to come and help me. I have to do this. I also have discovered the choice. And people have done a lot of soul searching at multiple levels, saying what really matters to me. It may be what excites me, it may be what energizes me. It may be what is the meaning of my life. And this is like going into deep, because people were forced to sit quietly in one place for a long period of time and think about what the hell was happening to them and what the hell were they all about. Pardon my French. So I think the need to say, look, guys, this is what I'm available to do, and I'm happy to stand in the public domain and say, I will do this for a compensation, or I will do it without compensation if I have an opportunity, because the very idea excites me, is for people to state.
Got it.
The trust that is needed is both from employers and from people who are in some form or manner the other side of the equation, employees or non-employees, whatever. To say, I trust you that you will do what the psychological contract of confidentiality and trustworthiness requires, and the employee or the moonlighter feels what is mine, and you will give me my due. You will not take it away and give it to a shareholder because he gave you some money to go and play with.
Sure. Thank you. Kavi, do you want to kind of add anything to
Yeah, just to respond to Bimal's question. And there is a spectrum of choices available now. There are formal consultants available to seek you out for your skills. So there's a outside in, people seeking you out and offering moonlighting opportunities. That's available now as a service. That's one. Two, there are platforms, a number of platforms which are globally available, which help you seek out specific opportunities for you to go and moonlight. Those are available. The third is not necessarily say that, look, I need this kind of an opportunity, but just to keep exhibiting stuff that I'm excited in on a regular basis. People publish YouTube videos, people publish blog posts and Twitter feeds and LinkedIn posts, and all of that is an example of demonstration of a portfolio of skills. And that in itself gets other people interested. And it often starts as, look, can I have a conversation with you on these topics? And then it just gradually molds into some kind of a flexible arrangement where mentoring and other skills work. The problem, the central problem of this whole thing is all of moonlighting is bad.
Bad. Exactly. I was coming to that.
That there are different shades to the moon. So if it's going to be, I would think there are just two vectors, and these two vectors. One is how much time are you spending on that? Two is what is your core skill that you're applying? This is my opinion here. For instance, if a Wipro says this particular skill I'm hiring here is a competitive advantage that I would like to keep for myself. I mean, I'm just staying with the current thought process, perhaps saying this competitive advantage is for myself. Now, I'm not sure if they have a problem with somebody going and volunteering somewhere. They have a problem with a software professional or a professional doing the same skill for which he or she was hired for, parallelly during office hours, quote unquote office hours, simultaneously on two laptops or two machines, just doing the same thing. I think that's where the real problem really is. I'm not sure if it was there is a blanket ban. By the way, there is an employment contract wide blanket ban on you cannot do anything else. And I think mentally we've crossed that barrier. At least in my conversations with people, like what we all agreed on when we started out, I don't think you can do anything about personal time. All of that is fairly, at least may not be on contract, but definitely in the mind we've crossed that bridge, is my opinion here.
Have we, Kavi? I'm just going to push you on that.
I
Satish is waving his finger.
Yes, okay. I would. I think so, but I'd like to hear from other people as well.
Yeah.
So I have a quick comment on that. You know, in a way, a lot of people are still saying moonlighting is criminal. Yeah, I'm exaggerating to make the point. Yeah. At best, I hear people like Mr. Gurnani today said, we will articulate a policy about this. Yeah. So there is an attempt to sort of capture the beast and regulate it. Yeah. And in a really harsh way, I think you can't deal with the subject of giving people respect for their own time beyond what they've committed to work for an employer or whatever, unless you decriminalize moonlighting.
Brilliant, Satish. In fact, that takes me straight to another question, Hari, that might be up your street, because you started talking about knowledge workers and IT firms. Satish Mane is asking, is it time for IT companies to start innovating their employee contracts? Because his argument is that customer satisfaction can be achieved only with employee satisfaction when they're the actual products that are actually getting built.
Yes.
Why is that not happening?
Yeah, I'll just come to a specific question in a moment, IG, but just, what Kavi said some time back, which is that, working on two laptops and during office hours. I think the question I have is that, there's nothing like office hours any longer. If it was so simple between 9 to 5, then people would be working outside of 9 to 5 doing the gigs. So I think then the employer should not expect that somebody should spend time on their work beyond that 9 to 5 window. So I don't think there's anything like office hours at all. And the second thing is about, using your core skills for, remunerate for doing other gigs. I think what else can an employee do? An employee has a certain set of core skills. It's very difficult to identify whether those core skills have been paid for adequately enough, to expect somebody not to use those anywhere else. And your unlimited time is available, for deploying those core skills only with that current employer. So I think that's a bit vague. So I think coming back to this IT, the question that you asked, IG, I think very clearly it's important for these for the IT companies to rethink their employee contracts, because ultimately, unless you feel a sense of fulfillment, you're not going to be creative at the workplace. You're not going to be able to produce the best quality of output at the workplace. So I think if the work itself is not, providing you that kind of fulfillment, and able to fulfill, meet all your passions, it's very important to even encourage your employees to go out and get those things fulfilled. But I think the problem is, what I think Gavi said, which is that if you go and do some work of, gratis for a non-governmental organization, teaching at a school, most companies wouldn't object. If you're working for your, housing society as a general secretary and spending a lot of time, people wouldn't object. They would object if you use your core skills. I think that is ridiculous. That just needs to be taken away. I think you can just say you are available for so many number of hours, and you are not going to disclose confidential information of this company to anybody else, and you are not going to work for any direct competitor. I think reasonable restrictions are okay, but the idea that you can't use your core skills, to earn a side income by doing gigs is, I think, completely, irrelevant and is very unfair. And, you can't use office time to do any other things because office time itself is not defined. So I think it's high time that these companies begin to relook at their contracts, because what will happen is, the good thing is that competitive pressures will force a company like Swiggy to take the lead, and they will then become magnets for talent. So I think here also you will find a free market mechanism working, unless all of them gang up together. And they have ganged up in the past, while recruiting campus hires and ensuring that salaries and campuses don't deviate a lot from what one is paying. But let's see. I think competitive pressures will force someone to take the good steps.
Hari, I mean, isn't attrition levels worrying enough for them to now act, or are they not seeing?
See, there are two ways in which, when you face a problem, you can look at it the right way or look at it the wrong way. So the right way to look at it is that attrition is happening because of these reasons, and then we need to let go. We need to give them a lot of independence. We need to treat them like adults. That's one very constructive and positive way of doing it. The other way of doing it is, attrition levels are going up. Can we clamp down? Can we say, everyone serves a 3-month notice period? And when someone quits, you say, you know what, I'm going to enforce a 3-month notice period, you like it or not, because I don't want you to join competition. So those are not very positive ways to retain your people, because then you're retaining a bunch of unhappy people. Unhappy people don't make your customers very happy. So I think, when you are faced with a problem, people approach it in two ways. The way one is to solve the problem, understand by going and understanding it at the root. Other is, doing things which makes it worse. I think currently some of them are doing things which are going to make it worse, but some of them are also figuring out, like Gurnani and a few others, very positive voices have also been speaking up.
Right.
I wanted to add, I wanted to add, not in fact add, because I have seen in a new age company also, still our contract says that you cannot join the competitor for next 12 months. So because sometimes I feel that if I have some core skills, and if I'm not allowed to work with a competitor or the same kind of industry where I will utilize my skill. So because still, although Hari is saying that we don't have the set timelines now that 9 to 5 you have to work, but still the expectations are there that, these are the office hours, you are supposed to be there. After office hour, definitely we all are working, but still these are the specific time, 8 or 9 hours, where we are supposed to work and give our best, because we have signed the contract with the company. So these two things are there. So I don't know, because sometimes we do hear that, okay, we should not have these contracts and all, but it's still a new age company. We have that contract in place. So how we have to deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring it up, because I think Luis Miranda is kind of referring to something which I think Swiggy has kind of clarified very clearly in its own policy. And he's saying, isn't the issue to do with prior approval from your employer, right? Many employers would let employees take an external role if requested for. But I don't know if any of you have a point of view on that, which merits a discussion.
I want to take this to a slightly different dimension rather than hammering down the same path. And the clue really came to me from what Hari and Surabhi have been saying. There is a business model understanding which is predicated on a phenomena that has emerged more recently. And both of them are speaking from the new world of some of these assumptions of business competitiveness and the business model. And I think that warrants respectful attention. We are seeing the emergence of not just star employees. We are seeing the emergence of an institutionalized stream of capability that becomes difficult for the competition to replicate. I mean, this is my interpretation of the two spaces that I am. And so I may be making a big leap and a wrong leap, as Hari would point out, or it may be close to where the landing should be. But I think if that be the case, then the notion of fragmenting the building of that capability as a source of competitive advantage cuts to the very heart of my beliefs about business success. So I think those are the areas in which we probably need to build a more inclusive and a better understanding of the multiple stakeholders. The fact today is, whether we like it or not, startups and this unicorn chase is also beginning to start getting a little disappointed with mere valuations. The glamour of valuations is now beginning to crash on the hard rocks of the shores of EBITDA and delivery of outcomes nearer to the bottom line, and a trajectory to profitability, which is seen as what can be monetized. It's still early signals, the sex appeal of, the appeal of a unicorn to be, or a startup with a great top line, and forget the rest. I mean, we are big. We've swung around to X thousand crores in so many days, and we've broken the back of existing big baskets and small baskets and people like that. And that, I think, is something we need to begin to start factoring in. Otherwise, solutions will elude us and opinions will proliferate.
Yeah. At this point in time, I thought it'd be useful to just focus on the last segment, because, and then we'll try and use this group to try and distill what you've learned. But as leaders, and we're all leaders in the room, and we're kind of thinking about these things which aren't simple. There are lots of things that are kind of intersecting with each other. But what are some of the simple things that leaders ought to think about if they, like Hari, you were talking about grabbing the initiative, and you do have a choice. I mean, you can saying that, look, this is how I've worked all my life, and I refuse to kind of acknowledge the writing on the wall. But I assume for a moment that everyone in this room is excited about driving positive change, right? What are 2 or 3 things that you would recommend as a panel in terms of what leaders ought to be doing, in terms of approach, in terms of practices, in terms of mindset changes, driving organizational buy-in as well, right? This is not something that you unveil a big moonlighting policy and pronto everyone across the organization will start supporting it. When it's going to happen, right? So starting with you, Hari, do you have a couple of points that you might want to just share as food for thought?
So I think, whenever there is a serious adversity, people go through multiple phases. The first phase is denial, then they get angry, then they get, think of bargaining, and then they get into a depression till they finally accept. So I think this is one such situation, which is that the entire industry is going through some kind of a big shift. And there is a lot at stake. And what do I mean by when I say a lot at stake is when some of these things begin to get accepted, it will have some pressure on the margins. So currently there is a certain level of EBITDA that investors and these companies have gotten used to. And I think if it means a dip in whatever we are recommending, if it means a dip in that and a dip in the multiple and the share price, that's something many of the executives will find it difficult to answer their shareholders. So I think there will be a lot of resistance. So this is not going to be an easy battle. And no one is really going to volunteer and take the first step as easily as Swiggy took, because Swiggy is a very private limited company, whereas many of the others are public companies. And for them, it will be even more difficult. So I think, what is very important is for these companies have so far, I would say, generally treated their employees reasonably well, paid them reasonably well, had built a reputation of fairness. I think over the years, something has really gone wrong, which is, trying to, preserve the margins, as a result of which they've taken up a lot of these harsh measures, very, very unilateral measures. And, defining, for example, we talked about this core skills, right? Core skills are so broadly defined. What core skill can give a competitive advantage to a Wipro or a Cognizant? I don't understand. Most of the people don't have anything really core that will really give Cognizant a competitive advantage. So stretching the definition of core skills and what it gives to the company as a competitive advantage, hence can't join anybody else for 12 months, I think is very, very unreal. So I think, before there is a lot of external, even the Prime Minister recently, spoke about the need for being far more flexible when it comes to work. And I think as a political leader, he's been able to understand this so beautifully. So I think it's very important for business heads to begin to understand that, you need to move away from these kind of things. And the first place to start with is review the employment agreement. And, employment agreements to start with are drafted by lawyers. And lawyers have always been used to thinking, in terms of how to impose as many restrictions as possible. So I think, several, stock option agreements, employment contracts, I think, the leaders and founders need to pay a lot more attention rather than accept, contracts drafted out by lawyers. So I think it's important to, look at the employment agreement first, figure out what clauses are really very essential, what are blanket clauses, what are stretching the arguments too much, and figure out where to make those reasonable changes. Reasonable restrictions are all okay. I think nobody will object to reasonable restrictions, but I think that's what we would recommend. Accept reasonable restrictions, but take away those patently unfair clauses from agreements and policies.
Sure. Thank you so much. The point is, I think, very well made. I'll come to you, Kavi. You sit down with a lot of leaders who are either running large organizations, mid-sized, or even startups as well. What is it that you would tell them that would help them get a better perspective in terms of how to deal with the future that's coming at us, or was already here, as some would argue? What needs to change?
Well, I think, with entrepreneurs, when startup entrepreneurs, they're not as quite worried about the employment contracts as much as they're worried about, are people able to deliver for me properly? So there's a lot at stake, and that's what the worry is. And in all these places, it's important that people understand that more the organization is open about these things, and there are more open conversations about these things, then people start redrawing their boundaries of what can happen, where and how. The fears of confidentiality is a real one. I'm building something, I'm scared that this will go to competitors. That's a real one. But unless you're able to sit down and have a general conversation with people on this and similar topics, people are not able to engage with the idea. Now, if you sit on this with value judgment, which is to say this is cheating, this is etc., etc., if you affix those labels, then I can't have a conversation with you, because you're beginning with a judgment on me, saying that, look, you are a cheat. Now, after that, it's very difficult for me to engage with you on it, and therefore, I think that organizations need to be more open about talking about this, and then help employees draw their own boundaries and settle. And the question that Anmol asked earlier also about burnout and taking on too much work, that is also a real question. But employees need to understand the consequences of their action if they go that way. Sometimes the allure of money, the allure of, look, I think I'll be able to make a quick buck, all of that is very real. We live in that kind of a world where I am able to exercise my choice and make things work for me, independent of what the organization was able to do earlier. And therefore, to help people have this conversation with openness and be flexible to see and to make a few experiments to start with, that's important. If you don't experiment, and if you're going to sit back and say that is blanket banned, I think it's going to proliferate. I think it's just going to proliferate even more with you keep saying that, look, that's not allowed. And that's already what we're seeing happening. Employees finding far more interesting ways to get through to doing whatever they want to get done. I was with one. I'll just tell you one very interesting with one employee. There's a ban in the organization that you can't do it, and the organization has also called back all employees, forced the employee to come back to office as a way of preventing this. What they've discovered is this employee, he happens to be in Bangalore, and he's gone back to office. Very interesting. He's found interesting people, young coders in small cities to whom he outsources his moonlight job. He breaks it down, he sends it up, and he has a way of monitoring the whole thing on his phone. Now, what do you do? Where do you stop? And therefore, I don't think you can stop it anywhere. But unless we have open conversations about this to start with, that will help people make the best use for themselves. And everybody understands that this is a certain sense of boundarylessness, which we must get more and more used to. And that's going to mean change for all of us. That's going to mean a lot of impact on our businesses and our business models. And that can be unsettling. That's a given. It has to be unsettling. But I mean, that's what business is all about.
So thank you for that brilliant perspective. Surabhi, you were listening intently to Kavi. What are the kind of conversations you've had at multiple levels in the organization about it? Because obviously the way your CEO will look at it may be quite radically different from a young employee who might have joined 1 year ago. Is there openness to kind of grapple with the complexities that this phenomena throws up?
In fact, after hearing Hari and Kavi, obviously, like young, if I talk about young, our entrepreneurs are very young. Our founders are very, very young people. And I believe are very important, like trust, flexibility, and openness. So definitely, we are very, very open about these things. Within our organization, very young organization, founders are very young and very transparent, open to all the things, all the new things. We are trying out very new things every day. So trust, I feel, Indrajit, that it's very important. If you're trusting your people, people will trust you. How you're communicating in a transparent manner, that also plays a very big role. Because the more you will push people, the more they will bounce back. So like those were the days when we used to punch attendance and all, okay, 10 to 6 job, and we are punching attendance and HR is monitoring that. Now we are not doing that. People are coming at their own time, they are leaving. Nobody's asking that what time you are coming and what time you are going. So it's all about flexibility and openness. So I feel that, and the good part at Dehad, I feel that being a young organization, founders are very young, and it's definitely a very good thing, and definitely very open to any kind of change. All the voices have been heard all the time.
That's
any new policy or changes, so we are definitely open about that.
Just building on what Surabhi was saying, there is a very interesting quote that I read somewhere, that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So in Surabhi's organization, there's no punch cards, but there are organizations, established organizations, where still punch cards work. And there are organizations where people are having very open conversations about moonlighting and several other topics. And there are organizations where these are banned words. It's already here. The important thing for us to understand is societally things have shifted. And if you ask the young, there is no question of lifetime employment. Things have shifted. And if that's what the societal context organizations are subsets of, then we have to change. And it may be unevenly distributed. It will continue to be unevenly distributed, but the direction is very clear for all of us.
Terrific. Now, so that I think brings in some ways us to the last segment, which is important segment, because here we try and kind of listen to each of you panelists, and I'd urge you to just surface one key learning that you've derived from this conversation, listening to your fellow panelists, and why. I mean, just give us a flavor. Given the time that we have, maybe in a minute or two, if that's okay. Keep it short but pithy, but try and think about what you've heard, process it, and it'll help, I think, our audience reflect, because we need to now what I call land the plane, right? We've got to walk away with some insights, and it'll give us some food for thought. Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
Hari?
Let me get over this question. So I think I really learned this idea of boundarylessness. I've been reading about this, many years back. This was a theoretical idea at that point of time, but I think the way Kavi and even to some extent Satish brought this out, which is that, brought it out in how it's playing out in the lives, and its relationship with moonlighting was wonderful. I thought that was really wonderful. I think that was the biggest learning for me. And the future, of course, is already here. We've heard that before. It's unevenly distributed. I think this is a quote I will carry away and shamelessly use wherever relevant.
Brilliant, brilliant. Surabhi, you want to go next?
Definitely boundarylessness definitely is there, because
no, that's not allowed. You'll have to pick
okay. so definitely this is one. But yeah,
so you know why I went first.
But definitely, I think flexibility, I believe it's very important. And I think communication, transparent communication, I feel it's very important, whether we have to go for moonlighting or not. But yeah, transparent communication has to be there. The more we will communicate, there is nothing wrong or bad or right. Okay. It's about that, how you are perceiving these things. So this is, I think, I will take.
Who made that point to your mind well?
I think Hari and Kavi both have made that point. So
okay.
definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Satish?
I think the one thing that all three of you have made it sort of jump out at me and grab my throat is that any kind of constructive solutioning about this absolutely requires a conversation amongst the various stakeholders. If we don't have a way of creating that conversation, I think we will fall down the stream of what Hari described as the wrong way to do things. So prejudging the outcome by approaching it in an inappropriate way, we will walk past the freshness and energy of the kind of areas that Surabhi represents and has brought to the panel, and the wisdom and sagacity of a longitudinal view of employment and business models that Kavi sort of reminded us of. And I think that's the tapestry that we've got to weave the fabric out of. And to me, that seems to be the way. It's difficult, it's challenging. It's about telling CEOs, can you think about a little more than today's cash flow and daily returns, and look at sustainability in terms of our people as well, and not as a fashion statement. It's also about telling people to really look at what really matters to them and engage with work in a manner that is meaningful to them in their lives. As they look at the sunset of each day, did the dawn follow the path that they wanted to, or they just happened to end up there? And for the government to get off the notion of freebies and vote banks, and really look at what does it mean to create an economic and political and legislative framework that brings out the right and wrong that Kavi talked about. Of you must have a contract of some kind. It has to be justiciable.
Sure.
But how does it become fair? So those are the threads that I think all the panelists brought out. But primarily, we've got to talk.
Great. Before I go to you, Kavi, I just wanted to suggest to our YouTube or live stream audience, if you want to just leave your feedback on the chat as well, because that will give us an indication of how this has gone down, any suggestions, any improvements. But if you were to describe this conversation in a word, what would that be? Anything, just feel free. I mean, even if it's harsh, so be it. But we'd like to hear from you. So, Kavi, while this is the last segment, so you get the last word.
Doesn't happen often.
Yes.
So,
Not at home, I'm guessing.
absolutely not. So I came in here very strongly oriented towards the deficit in the psychological contract. I mean, I'm very clear about that. But the other side of the importance of the legal contract and how that must also be looked at very carefully and how it's one-sided is something that I'm really mulling over, and how that's what the point that Hari made earlier, which is about, okay, now I think we need to start there as well, even as we work on the psychological contract and build that bond. So that's something. The second thing with what Satish brought in very early in the conversation about is about another class that we are not speaking about here. And I think that's something else that we really need to go back and think about as well. I mean, this is a very sophisticated conversation about a sophisticated set of people having maybe perhaps a first world problem in a broader economic sense. But what else is happening in society is something that we really need to go back and think about. And Surabhi, I think Dehat, I'm going to really follow you guys and see what else you're up to. So
amazing bunch of people, I must tell you, sir.
Yes. Very good. I'll definitely go back and look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, this has been a terrific conversation. I also wanted to thank our audience because they kind of shared a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I couldn't address all of them, but we'll see if there is a way to process with the help of all of you, maybe through voice notes or something of that sort. It'll be wonderful if we can respond to some of them individually, not all, but at least a few more. But I don't even want to attempt to try and synthesize or summarize this conversation. It's beyond me at this point in time, but we are doing one thing for sure. My colleague Shweta Basrao, she's been taking running notes, and you will see magic at the end of it, I can assure you, because she does this just simply brilliantly, right? Of being able to summarize so pithily, and that will come to you with the recording to all the entire audience. So you'll get a high-level set of key takeaways and a recording of this conversation, which you can go through again if you like at leisure, or share it with your colleagues. We want this conversation to take root in organizations, in networks. More people need to talk about it, not shove it under the carpet, as we tend to do sometimes in India. So I'm very glad that what the conversation that we began on around the 3rd of August with Swiggy has actually progressed. I mean, think about it. I mean, there are organizations and leaders who are now forced to in some ways address it. So it is, well, one of the many elephants in the room, to use a cliche. And hopefully something good will come out of it. But again, thank you, Surabhi, Hari, Satish, Kavi. Wonderful perspectives. I'm sure there's enough and more people are going to take away in terms of food for thought. So on that note, on behalf of the entire Founding Fuel team, a very, very big thank you to the panelists as well as the audience for coming together. And we'd like to keep this conversation open. Let's see, we'll find some mechanisms. Let's process what we've heard and what we've heard from you, panel members, and the audience as well, so that we can kind of serve that very well. So I think on that note, we'd kind of bid you goodbye. It's well past 8 now, and we're 3 minutes over time, which is not bad. Let's give some credit on that. So I'll request the panel to stay on, but we'll end the live stream now. All the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.